This is while I gave myself a home haircut earlier in the week.
Good stuff. I think we're recording now.
Yes.
So, hi, James. Thanks for joining us. Just tell us, you're joining us from the west of Ireland. So that big map in the background is a bit of a red herring, but you actually are from New Zealand. Is that correct?
Yes, I am actually from New Zealand originally, and I've been in the west of Ireland in Limerick for two and a half and a bit years.
Oh, yeah. We'll start off there. Tell us what you're doing in Limerick. You're in the University of Limerick.
Yeah, so I work at the University of Limerick. I teach health psychology and quite a bit of research methods and do sort of like research in health psychology at the University of Limerick.
Okay. The University of Limerick is, of course, a stronghold of R and data science in the west of Ireland. Some of my colleagues are quite established R users are based out of there. R is used quite a lot in that field. Is that the case?
So I would say more in psychology than, so I work kind of like in the health field, and so it depends. Like statisticians would use R more, but for the sort of like the jobbing medics and stuff, they would still be in the point and click world by and large.
So other sort of platforms that might be popular in that domain and the associated domains would be Stata and SPSS. Would that be correct?
Mostly SPSS. I think I know one person in my department uses Stata, and there's still a few SAS holdouts.
Okay. Have you been a long-term R user yourself?
So I first started dabbling in R almost 20 years ago.
Wow.
When I was doing my PhD, there was a study that I was trying to analyze that I hadn't designed, and it was like a what would be called a dyadic thing. We have pairs of people interacting, and there were some sort of like established solutions for where you have like multiple pairs of people interacting. Where they were doing it in kind of like a round robin fashion. So you'd have like a group of people and each of them would interact with everybody else in the pair. And there were ways of controlling for the like relatively non-independent nature of that data. But somewhat ambitiously, somebody had done like a much more chaotic design. And so each person had had a couple of conversations with other people in the pool. And so I was trying to come up with like a completely bespoke and disgusting covariance matrix. Which just didn't actually in the end worked out. Though at the time, I mean, because back then you couldn't like, I mean, now you can just like Google pretty much any answer for R. So I had like a regular expression problem actually that I was working on yesterday, and I just, fired into Google and basically came back with a recipe which worked it out for me. But back then you were really kind of on your own, and I ended up emailing like one of the most famous guys of that sort of analysis in the world who helped me with it, but I didn't actually end up ever getting my covariance matrix to initialize.
There you go. So this is at very much the early days of R. So this is around 20 years ago. So be 20 or around the year 2000.
Yeah,
R was
2001,
very much
2002. I think it might have been version 2.
Okay,
maybe.
Very early days of R. So I don't think it would have much prominence at all. I didn't even hear of it myself, and I was quite literate about programming languages back then. So tell me, what sort of supports did you have, or what sort of structures did you have? I mean, you obviously didn't learn it as an undergraduate the way that many people would do it now.
No, God, no. So actually, it's a really good question. I don't even know how I heard about it or why it even occurred. I think maybe I was like specifically trying to find out about dyadic analysis, and maybe I came across a paper that had multi-level modeling in it that was done in R, and maybe that's how I found out about it, because I mean, and there was nothing. I mean, I would have, literally just been using like whatever documentation came with it. It was like, there was definitely nothing that was, like this is how there was no sort of like tutorials or anything. And actually I didn't do very well at it, I would say. Like I was incredibly unprogrammatic. I would have probably not used scripts, would have done everything at the command line, would have done it quite badly, quite untidily, quite unreproducibly. Not.
those are the days. Those are different times. So we can all
It
understand
was the
that.
Wild West.
It feels so long ago. It almost feels as if it was the Roman Empire or something like that. It's the Dark Ages. New Zealand, of course, has a strong pedigree. It's actually the home of R. Did you interact with many people in the R community then? Surely it might have been relatively stronger there in that period.
So I didn't get that sense. So I was at the other end of the country to where all of the good stuff was going on. So Ross Ihaka and I forget what the
Robert Gentleman, is it?
Yeah, Robert Gentleman. I couldn't remember. I knew it was another R, and I was going to go Ross, and I was thinking about Robert. Yeah, they were both based in Auckland, so there was like I presume like a strong R community in Auckland. I don't even think that our stats department back then. I mean, the person who was probably most seminal in teaching me statistics, he was back then. This is such a blast from the past. Younger viewers, when I say OS2, and you go, OS what now? He was running OS2, which was like a competitor to Windows from IBM back in the early days. And he wrote all his own code bespoke on OS2. So he didn't actually use a statistical software. He just like somehow wrote code in some programming language you already knew on OS2.
Wow, we have to find that guy.
I still am in contact with him. He uses Linux now, and I suspect he uses R.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll have to find out.
I did. The last time I caught up with him, I think I did literally ask him, "Are you still using OS2?" And he was like, "God, no, I've switched to Linux." And I was like, "About freaking time." I mean, this in 2000 and whatever, I was like, "How are you still using OS2? You know, if you're that committed to this, you should have switched to Linux."
We should go back in time and do sort of like a capsule, or sort of see what we were like in the year 2000.
Yeah.
Just to sort of like stun ourselves and realize how far we've come scientifically in terms of scientific computation.
This is like madly off topic, given that we're talking about R, but both of my PhD supervisors grew up writing sort of like syntaxy stuff and using either BMDP or SPSS on a server. So you weren't actually like running statistics on your local machine. And the post hoc tests that I did in my PhD, and this is only 20 years ago, people, I logged into a VAC server, and I barely know what a VAC server is, but somebody had written a script on a VAC server which did the specific, I can't remember what the name of the test was, but they did the specific test, couldn't do an SPSS, but actually a student Newman-Kills, there we go, I couldn't remember what the S stood for. Wanted to do student Newman-Kills postdocs because that's what my supervisor said I should do, and somebody in the stats department had written a script which was on the VAX server, and so you had a VAX login and you went and typed things on the command line and you got your answer back.
Wow, this is I don't even know how to follow that up. Like it's a sort of that just a sort of like the prehistory of statistical computing. It's a sort of worth of the discussion. Tell me, so we were just talking about the University of Auckland there, but you were actually not in the University of Auckland, Auckland being the capital city of New Zealand, and it's not the capital city, but it's the largest city.
It used to be the capital city 160 years ago, but it hasn't been for a while.
It's right up at the top of New Zealand. The capital city is sort of in between the two islands. We can see in the background, we can see a map of the South Island there.
So New Zealand, Dunedin is there. It's
down near the bottom of the South Island.
It's either the southernmost university or fighting it out with somewhere in the bottom of Argentina, but I think it's the southernmost university. It's also literally as far away as you can get from Limerick and still be at a university.
Wow. Okay. Well, so it's just a sort of like, would it be fair to characterize the South Island is much more rural? I mean, most people would know the South Island of New Zealand as where they shot The Lord of the Rings and the big dramatic landscapes. Would that be sort of how you sort of recognize it?
Yeah, it would be big and relatively rural and wild.
Okay, so it's a sort of New Zealand is, as we know in the COVID era, is sort of tucked away in the corner of the world, safe from the worst ravages of the COVID crisis, and Dunedin is down the bottom. It's not a big city. It's about 200,000, something like that.
120-ish.
Okay, yeah. So, like, I'm guessing that, like, the statistical computing, if you were there on, you would have been in a small minority in the scientific community, and it would be or would that be fair to say? I mean, surely, actually, a lot of agricultural companies would actually have strong statistical functions. Maybe I'm being presumptuous there.
So there's another university a bit further north, which would have like probably a more agricultural bent. I mean, there was quite a strong statistical community. Again, oh my God, going back into like the dark ages. So there used to be a very popular email software back before Outlook called Pegasus Mail.
Wow.
And that was written by a guy in the department that I studied in. He used to be one of our technicians, and then he left the department and supported Pegasus Mail full time until it sort of like slowly fell into the abyss.
Wow. So, like, I'm guessing that, like, you were there. How long were you in the South Island?
So I've been lived there all my life actually until quite recently, and had been in Dunedin for 21 years.
Okay, so how was it like developing in the art community based in Dunedin?
So I would say that I had very little interaction with anybody else using R. So one of the things I said earlier about how I didn't really use R much when I was, well, there was no real resources to get hold of R. So after that initial kind of like foray into R, for a while, sort of in the 2006 to 2008 period, some people will be aware that there's a way that you can eventually get R to work inside SPSS. So you embed your R code inside your SPSS syntax. And so one of the reasons why I probably ended up doing that for a while is because I never, well, at that stage in my R career, I never got the hang of like data management and transforming variables and stuff. I would still probably actually have done quite a lot of that in either Excel, or I knew how to do it in the SPSS syntax. And just it took me a long time to get my head around the R is in a spreadsheet, essentially, whereas SPSS is still kind of like fundamentally a spreadsheet. And I think now that I like really get that and understand it, that seems like a really easy and powerful thing to do, because sometimes in SPSS you'll make like a series of spreadsheets and then you'll try and recombine them. But so that was my next step into that. And then a couple of years, so after my PhD, I did a couple of jobs. Oh my God, this is turning into like such the magical mystery tour of like arcane and arcade.
It's actually very good. I think we got, we'll keep going anyway.
Yeah, no, so anyway, my first job out of my PhD was working for a guy that used Statistica.
I know that name. I saw it once.
Oh God, like it still had like a Windows 3.11 kind of like feel to it. It was like, and the version of it that he still had a licensed version of it, it was basically it was virtually not running. But that was still his pet. And he had this beautiful server set up, which one of his smart PhD students had all programmed up. And actually, I have no idea what platform. But that was all very kind of cleverly done. And I think back in those days, it was very much like you would have people like little islands of knowledge that knew stuff, and it was like much less kind of like connected and joined up. And that seems, and it was much harder to get into, and it was sort of quite idiosyncratic. Anyway, so after that job, I started another job. That was my first sort of like university teaching job, working in a pharmacy school. And not that long after I started, another guy started working with me. He was an epidemiologist and he was an R guy. And so we would talk about R, and I'd be like, I occasionally use R. And then about a year later, they got an enormous grant. And so they were dealing with like a lot of sensitive health data. And so he got to build like this huge, ridiculous for the time server, because all of his stuff was encrypted. And so it would be unencrypted on the fly, analyzed, and then kind of like re-encrypted, which at the time was very hard work for a computer. So he got to have this like ridiculous server. And so it'll be about that time that I probably stopped, because he was just in the office next door. And so that was probably about the point that I stopped being such a full about, because actually the other thing, it was really hard to like install the SPSS R thing. It was quite ridiculous just getting it to work most of the time. Yeah, so that was probably about the point that I started using R kind of more natively. And actually, when you were talking to me earlier, I was trying to work out, I know that sometime in the 5 to 7 year ago period, I was like, I just need to switch to R. Because I had already got deep into the SPSS syntax. So I was already kind of like scripting everything. And SPSS just wasn't doing what I needed it to do. And I knew that there were better and more modern things that could happen in R. So I was sort of like trying to become better at R. And I think along at the same time, like the tutorials became better. Hadley, who's also from New Zealand, but also somebody that I've never really met or interacted with, started the Tidyverse, and I found the Tidyverse to be much more intuitive. And I work with a couple of people who really dislike it. So when we're kind of like collaboratively trying to design functions, they're like, don't put any pipes inside this function. I'm like, I really want pipes inside the function. Anyway.
Yeah, okay. It's sort of like you're talking about a sort of a very interesting period. So it was about 2013, 2014 when it was the start of the Tidyverse boom. That's when dplyr was released. ggplot has been around for a while.
Yeah.
But that this is sort of began the popularity. I think it transformed. It transformed R into something that was very approachable for new users. I feel, and so this is sort of the big bang of the for R's popularity, I believe. But so just before that period, like, so there was a sort of it established a sort of prominence for itself. Let's say between 2010 or 2015, where it's still ggplot was there, but essentially, you know, the emphasis was on base R at the time.
Yeah.
And what was your interaction or engagement with R like in that period?
So I don't remember when I really started making that transition. I know that I would have had a PhD student from about 2010 to about 2013. And I remember thinking at the time, the next PhD student I have, I'm going to start them in R and hold them to it. And it was especially at the point that I was starting to kind of like head off into R, and I still had students who were still using SPSS and who were uninclined to head towards R. And I was like, this is not. I mean, I still get asked actually quite a lot to like help people with their analyses in SPSS. And I'm like, I mean, I still sadly mostly remember how to do it, but
I actually have a very good relationship with SPSS. It paid a lot of my bills, so I'm going to be very nice about it. That's great. So essentially, I mean, we'll just wrap it up there. And so, what's your reflections on?
Well, actually, I've got one more Shaggy Dog story. Actually, I think, and I said this. I think the thing which really kind of like kicked me on is that around 2015, 2016, I did a couple of data science courses on Coursera with some of the guys at Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
And just really transformational in terms of like writing small functions. Like I'd sort of like tried to modify other people's functions, but struggled, but really understanding how functions work. Being able to use anonymous functions is just sort of like an amazing life hack. Though I feel like that might be the next thing to fall under like Hadley's thumb. Though actually, I feel like, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, so that really kind of kicked it on. And I still haven't written a full-on package. I have sort of like a draft package, which I may or may not get back to.
Me too, yep.
But I have successfully written some functions that other people use, and I can now, you know, find and fix bugs in other people's software and kind of like send them and fix them.
Good stuff. So finally, just actually, how do you feel R is going? It sort of will it establish itself in your field, like, or become more prominent, or will it SPSS always have a sort of
No, so I think
prominence?
SPSS is definitely fading and dying, actually. I mean, I agree, you know, like SPSS has served me very well over the years, but there's also all of the kind of like the broken things about SPSS as well. You know, it took them 20 years to correctly label the effect size for ANOVA. So, you know, there's lots of published papers where people like mislabel their partial eta squared as eta squared because SPSS has the wrong label on it. Or, you know, nobody ever installs patches for SPSS, or at least not in my experience. It was only when I first came across, I couldn't merge two files together. And I was like, why won't this merge work? This merge always works. And then it turned out that there was a bug in version 14 or whatever, and there was a patch for it. I was like, oh, there are patches for SPSS. My IT people never encouraged me to install patches for this program. So I think R is so much more kind of like cutting edge. It's responsive. People design things which you need it to do. So I mean, the script, which I like literally just finished, or the function, actually, I should say, the function that I just finished writing this morning, Microsoft Teams does automatic captioning. I want to clean up and tidy up its automatic captioning. And so I wrote a function which uses regular expression to delete all the like useless cruft out of its automated captions.
Okay, so the sort of dwelling words.
No, actually, so my friend has written a package which will get rid of all the dwelling words, but no, it for every sort of like 8 words, it has like a time range and it tells you its confidence and its transcription and various other rubbish in it.
Okay.
And so basically just deleting all that. But because it's reasonably structured, but you do need to probably use regular expression to get rid of it. Otherwise, you'd just be deleting every 4 lines.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, James, I think we'll leave it there. I think you sort of gave us a lot to think about, and it was great that you've joined us, and we'll sort of some interesting insights into the halcyon classical period of statistical computing, like with the like is something like out of Socrates and Aristotle, you know, with abacuses and all that. The year 2000.
Yeah,
feels like that. Thanks very much. We'll leave it there. I will stop the recording now.
perfect.